All right. My name is Jaron Matheson, the host of the Upstream podcast. And today's guest has just been on not that long ago, and it was so good and interesting and got lots of comments. Had to bring him back. My really good friend, Jake Hatch.
What's up? It's me, Jake Hatch. That's my name.
Such a great intro. Um, yeah, so Jake, I want to dive into. We talked about Nephilim, we talked about giants, we talked about the unseen realm. We just kind of went all over the place really broadly.
Yeah, brushstrokes.
Yeah, I really want to dive into. Let's hone in on a few topics and just kind of dive in. And I think this conversation, just to let people know, is like it's a conversation. We're trying to figure this out. There's so many unknowns. There's so many, variables of the unseen realm and the different heavens and
Yeah,
the different beings and what God created that I don't think we're gonna know until we actually go to heaven all these things. And so
yeah, and there's like so many interpretations that everyone has, like already, like, oh yeah, well, this is how I believe this particular scripture. It's like, okay, well, might not be true, but it might be true. So let's, you know, explore that a little bit.
yeah, no, let's dive in that. So with that, let's go right into your thoughts on the different classes of, we can call them angelic beings, we can call them angels, we can call them Nephilim, we can call them demigods. There's so many different words that have been used throughout time that would characterize, I feel um, like what we would say angel. So break
Mm-hmm.
me down your thoughts, what you've learned, what you've read. Is there different classes? Are there one? Is there two? Or is there many? What are your thoughts on that?
There are many, and I think they depend on what they kind of do. So like the word angel actually just means messenger, right? So like when you just think generic term angel, it just means messenger. It just means like, some a deliverer of a message or of a word. And so on the most basic level, all angels are essentially messengers. They're delivering something or they're carrying forth God's word, and they're always listening for God's word. So they're always listening to us to verify what we're saying. So it says like the sons of man or the earth is waiting for the sons of man to appear. The angels are listening, same thing. Like they're listening for what we're saying and with the words coming out of our mouth. Is it what God's speaking? So that's kind of like the generic angel. But then there's kind of hierarchy. There's like ones that are like remain in the heaven, kind of yeah, like thrones. I've kind of heard the other names with the cherubim, cherubim, and the last Eum. uh, then there's like a kind of slightly lower levels where there's principalities, powers, and dominions. And then there's like even lower than that, which are just kind of like your messenger angels that are just like what you think of when you just think of angel. And I think there's some more classes in there in between, but those are like the most important, the ones that are most commonly interacted with and talked about. I mean, in Isaiah, and those are the ones in the visions that they see, the wheels between wheels and things like that. Um, so yeah, those are kind of a brief overview. Is there any particular one that you want to like go in and hone in on? Because I was kind of wanting to hone in a little bit like on principalities, dominions, powers a little bit, and because a lot of people hear principalities and powers and they're just like, oh, those are just demonic things. And in the context that we interact with, usually that's like we're not fighting against flesh and blood, but principalities, powers, and dominions, and the rulers of this world.
Yeah,
So
let's go into that. So I'm gonna give you a segue to dive into that. So right now, me and you are watching. We just watched The Hobbit, all three,
oh yeah,
and we just watched The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers with some friends. And I'm diving into this movie, and as I'm watching this with you and our friends, I'm sitting here going, "There's so many parallels, I think, to this topic that J.R.R. Tolkien put in here." And so in The Hobbit, you have Gandalf, you have Elrond, you have Galadriel, and you have Saruman, and then you have Radagast. So
mm-hmm.
there's five, and then there's two more blue wizards that you never
You
see,
never see them,
but they call themselves the Guardians of Middle Earth, or
right?
Elrond does because he mentions something to Gandalf, and he says, "You're not the only guardian,
Yeah,
of Middle Earth." And so
yeah,
there's these five, and I'm watching this, and Gandalf gets trapped. Right, he's in Dol Guldur, and he goes and seeks out the enemy to unmask him because there's like this spell, and he wants to go in there. And so I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, these beings are on this earth. and one's, a couple are wizards and some are elves, and they're saying they're the guardians of that realm. And so come back to our world and outside the movie. Like, do you believe that there are specific guardians that were put for Earth and for different places on Earth? And then I'm going to break this down again on Kasariumon Falls. Okay.
Saruman, yeah.
And I want to come back to that, but I want you to break me down your thoughts on that whole thing of classifications of the principalities. There's realms, there's segments, and there's all these places. Do people have, not people, do these angelic beings have places that they are guarding and have authority over?
Yeah, I would say so. So like right off the bat, if you're talking about like the three kind of main guardians of the Lord of the Rings, you got Gandalf and what's her name, the female
Gladriel.
Gladriel, and I guess Saruman. Um, but are they're the ones who have the three? No, Gandalf has one ring, Gladriel has the other ring. Who is the third, or is that one lost? Of like
Um,
the other three rings of power.
yeah, there's another elf that has it. I think Elrond, I thought he had it, but I don't think he actually has it. It's a
Yeah.
different elf, but Gandalf and Gladriel have those two rings.
Right. I always kind of thought of them as kind of a like the guard, like definitely the word guardian is very appropriate, but I always kind of thought them as like paralleled, like maybe archangel type thing,
Hmm.
you know. In the real world, like the three archangels that are mentioned throughout Scripture, I mean, the ones that are in the Bible are Gabriel and Michael, and then there's Raphael, who's kind of mentioned in some um other books that are not all considered canon, or you can make whatever you want to call them. But Gabriel is usually always delivering a message. So he's always like going to someone, going to a prophet, and speaking to him and giving him the words or giving him what God is saying to him to speak to the nation. And then we know that Michael is a warrior angel, and he's like straight up guardian. Like he's like got a sword and whatever as he's described. Um, and I would say maybe Gladriel is probably closest to Gabriel. I mean, they both start with G.
Hmm.
Not that that's as significant, but you know, like she has her power, but she's usually always like giving wisdom and talking to the people of Middle Earth. And Gandalf is very wise, but he's also always in the battle.
Yeah.
Like he has a sword, and he's always in the battle. He's very wise. He's always in battle. Um, so I think that's like a good parallel of like understanding like these angelic beings, they interact, and they're not interacting with everybody. They're interacting with key people that change the course of history. Um, so if you want to talk about like if kind of segue a little bit into principalities, powers, and dominions, and there's like some interpretations, especially when you read the scriptures like Ephesians 6, that the principalities are like spirit beings. Sometimes people think that like dominions and like rulers and powers, like the powers and rulers are might be like physical leaders on the earth. um and I mean, I kind of have that same thing. I usually kind of break it down by each word. So like dominion is like the spiritual being of a region, of a country or a region or of an area, and that spiritual being has literal dominion. And dominion in the word and like in the word and the history of the Bible, it means the ruler, to have lordship over.
Mm.
So like the most, the one who has all the dominion is Jesus, of course. And so he's the head of all of that dominion. But there's like he delegates other dominions to other spiritual beings. And then you have the same thing on the demonic side though. So you have like these same potential beings, principalities, dominions, powers on the same demonic side, and they have the same kind of parallel, like kind of function. And then you also have principalities, which I usually kind of view as subjects. Kind of like say like of a city or like a certain area. There's like a spirit of kind of like murder. Like that's like one that's kind of talked about sometimes.
Mm.
Like that's like it's like usually a subject matter where it's like it. I kind of think it's like, oh, that's that subject, or that's like that spirit of that thing, or of chaos, or of like confusion. It's like that's a principality. Like that's things that you're having to deal with that are like actual influences on those subjects. And then you have lastly powers or rulers in some translations. And those might actually be physical rulers and leaders. Like even in Revelation talks about like the kings of the earth. And I think there's like I think it's like a half hybrid of that same thing because there's like again some other non maybe non-canon texts talk about that these are actual beings, so they might be, but the powers might be kind of spiritual beings that influence specific leaders in a country or like minister to certain like people who are in charge of areas of places on the earth. So I mean, you can get like into the again angelic side, demonic side.
Yeah.
Again, angel always means messenger. So you have these spiritual beings always trying to influence in these areas that they have power in. So they're like trying to like influence leaders maybe or influence the area of a people group or maybe influence like a certain subject and get like a certain culture to start engaging in that kind of thing. So principalities get the culture involved. Dominion gets like the country like against another country. Or like the powers is like the individual rulers making decisions and influencing what they decide to do for the country. So that's how I've kind of always viewed that those three specifically. The other ones I'm not as confident, like, I understand, like, them because 'cause they're, like, the cherubim, seraphim. The ones up in the top, they have the eyes, the many heads, and all that weird
That's
stuff.
crazy, man. Yeah.
I mean, have you ever thought about seeing one of those things?
I think I would be pretty frightened.
I mean, it always says, "Do not be afraid," and I'm like, "Are you sure?" Like, you're pretty scary probably. Like, I imagine that, and I'm like, I don't know. My thought is that these beings in the higher dimensions of, like, the spirit realm, they don't necessarily have a physical correlation to them. So when they do appear physically, like they have like these crazy, like they manifest in these crazy
Mm,
ways that our human brains can't fully comprehend. So we describe them with like these mini wings or mini eyes because that's just like
yeah.
we can't even just.
All right, I want to rewind just a little bit.
Yeah,
There's
there's
a
a lot
couple
there.
things. Yeah, there's a lot. So I want to break down with you when you talked about like these guardians in Lord of the Rings, how they kind of they do with they go to key people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the interesting thing is with Gandalf though, he likes to go hang out with everybody. And
Mm-hmm.
he likes the hobbits, the ones that they're not warriors. They can't do a whole lot, to most people mind, but yet the hobbits are the one who end up saving the day, right?
Yeah.
And he has this famous line, and I'm gonna butcher it a little bit, but it's basically like, Saruman always thinks it's the most powerful, and the most wise that do anything, but Gandalf's like, but I find out it's the little things and it's the that make the difference. And so
Yeah.
he goes, that's why Frodo and Bilbo gave him hope, because if they can do it, the world can change. And so it's interesting because to the hobbits, Gandalf is this fireworks guy. He's not a warrior. He's just this wizard that runs around and he's got a great cloak, and they have no idea who he is. And
Yeah.
most people really don't know how powerful he really is.
Especially post is becoming Gandalf the White.
Yeah, that's a whole different thing. So that's a very interesting segue on when you talk about like angelic beings visiting here and taking some kind of form and interacting. We just never know who we're talking to, I feel like sometimes. And I'm reading this book right now, The Chronicle Brothers by Wendy Alec, and I'm in this part where I just got to this morning, an elder of the 24 elders, which are above the archangels
Oh,
in
yeah.
this book. And one of the elders took on this human form. And this guy, he's 40 now, and he revealed himself as this elder angel. And this guy never believed he believed God was real, but he never surrendered to him, right?
Mm.
Never thought he was Lord, and he just thought it was crazy, blah blah blah. He's like, but there's something out there. And then he reveals himself in his true form. He gets like 8, 9 feet tall, and he just like, and this guy's like blown away, and he's been a guardian over his family. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And he's one of the 13 bloodline families that's on Lucifer's team. But this guy,
Oh,
this
yeah.
kid, he's not a kid, he's 40, but he's the son of someone that did some terrible things. And
The corrupted bloodlines.
yeah. And so this elder reveals himself and goes, there's laws that I can't break. I
Mm.
can't tell you everything, but I can point you in a direction and I can guide you. And he said, but the enemy has the same thing. They can't break the laws either, or they get sent to the abyss early. And so he was warning him that there's a war coming,
Mm.
and he has a vital piece to play, but it's his choice how he plays it. And so he revealed himself, and he can't share everything. And so it's interesting because
Right,
I
not to
look,
break the free will, kinda.
yeah. So break me down with this. So you got these guardians, you got Gandalf, you got all these, but they interact at key moments and they pivot, but they don't interact all the time. And they're trying to do things, but even when I'm watching the movie, I'm going, Gandalf's always meddling and Elrond, but they come to aid, and I see a lot of resemblance of, like you said, an archangel or guardians that can interact, but they don't do it all the time. So,
Yeah.
and I think there's something to do with an internal law, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and there's, like, even a whole thematic thing too where it's like, what you're talking about with Gandalf, and he's like he's looking to these this, motley crew, if you will, of people, like, he even in The Hobbit, he brings all these dwarves together and and Bilbo, and, it's like this motley crew, like, it's not like what you would expect for these guys, and, but Gandalf is always, like, acting in, like, key moments, and sometimes he disappears, sometimes he comes back. He's always in key moments, and I think that's very kind of a lot of time how angels will react, and like how you said with this book they read him with like the guardian of the family, like these bloodlines, like they're in the real world. There are actual like specific bloodlines that have, I shouldn't say more influence, but just like they have,
I think that's a good word to use. I think
yeah,
there's more words you could use, but influence is good.
influence. I think like either based off like rituals that they've done or whatever, or even like you talk about like the house of David, like Judah, like they like it was prophesied that the Messiah would come through the the tribe of Judah, and so it's like things like that are have I think have a correlation even in the spirit. Like there are specific families and things that have influence, and that these particular, maybe not that, like, the archangels have, like they're, like, specifically assigned to these things, but they come and they do key pivots. Like that, like, what was the name in The Hobbit who was, the dwarf king who they
Thror,
uh,
Thorin.
Thorin? Yeah, like, I mean, he's, like, a key player, but he's also, like, he had lost everything, his family had lost everything,
Yeah.
but, like, Gandalf knew, like, "Oh, if I interfere here, it's gonna change whole things in the future."
Mm,
It's gonna change, like, so many outcomes, and it allowed for things to be discovered, allowed for Sting to be found. I mean, they found it even like, that's how the One Ring came about, like, that whole journey, like, it was brought for like,
yeah.
these events. I mean, there's, like, kind of a meme that's like, "Can't invent," it's like these things, although the angels have a lot more knowledge because they're getting directly their directions from God.
Hmm.
However, there's a correlation to that same thing, like, these characters, and I think even with Gandalf, is it I mean, correct me if you know, but I think, talking about, like, they're, like, sent from another dimension or something. Like, they're not, like, born in Middle
Yeah.
Earth. They're, like, where they came I never know read the Silmarillion, but
Yeah. Gandalf is sent here, the wizards, and like when he comes back as white, he was sent back. Like he went and battled the Balrog of Morgoth, and then technically he died, and then he gets sent back to be Saruman because Saruman didn't do his task. And so there's other forces at play that
mhm.
are not meddling. They're sending and using um like the archangels, right? They're
Yeah.
like, and so in sense, maybe J.R.R. Tolkien was hinting like God is sending Gandalf back, or like sending an angel back because the fight's not over yet. And it's really
Yeah.
interesting. I want to get into this, but I want to rewind one more time
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
you said something, and I would like I thought about this when we were watching the Hobbit
Mhm.
and then into Lord of the Rings, because Saruman, he's good and he's on the good team, and then he falls. And so I was watching this and I'm going, you know what this reminds me of? If he's a guardian, it's almost like he's a watcher, because when the watchers fell, they corrupted this earth, right?
Mhm.
And I was like, this is an interesting take. And so he's a
Mm.
watcher
Yeah, I
of
like
Middle
that.
Earth. He's a guardian. He's supposed to be a protector. But
He's
yet,
supposed to be the highest
you're right. He's supposed to be the highest of that order.
of that order. Yeah, and, of course, all of the Lord of the Rings, fan people out there are gonna be like, "Well, in the books, he was actually still trying to, be good, but he just has his own way of doing it." Because there's, like, a whole thing in the books where it was still selfish ambition,
Hmm.
um, but he was still, like, he didn't want Sauron to he wasn't siding with Sauron, but he just thought that he could control the earth through his own means. I think in the book, maybe he wanted to take the power for
Oh,
himself
yeah.
and, be like, "Oh, if I do that, then I can go back to my realm." There's something about him going back to his realm and being celebrated by the beings that had sent him there. So, like, he was from a different realm where there's, like, these celestial type beings. So, again, parallel. Um, and again, I like the parallel of how these, like, especially with the wizards, it's very apparent with the wizards, they each have a power level based on what their color is, and it's almost like
Mm,
it's part of their identity,
mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So, like, even with angels, it's like with the different classifications, it's their identity, not necessarily like in their power level, but it's a little different with the angels, but it's the same thing. You know, it's like they have distinctions based on what they are. It's like part of their identity. And with Gandalf, he was sent back, and then he became like the Saruman because Saruman didn't fulfill his purpose, or was fulfilling it in the way that maybe the powers that be were like, this is not going to work. And so key moment was pivot to bring him into his power, to for righteousness. And even Gandalf knew like, you can't give me, don't tempt me, Frodo. You know,
Yeah, no, that's I wanna break that down. So it's really interesting because when he said he didn't wanna be tempted is because he knew that he said, "I would use the ring for good, but through me, it would create a power so unattainable imagined," or I can't remember the exact phrase, but
yeah.
the whole idea is he would have good intent, but the ring would corrupt him because
He'd force it upon.
he would force righteousness and good on people, and he would take away free will,
Mhm.
and it really made me think, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, our God is unbelievably fathomable to understand," because when he said that, I was like, "Let's just break this down for a minute." Is Gandalf knew that that ring would corrupt him because he would forcefully try to do good on people, and that's not what God does.
Yeah.
And he knew when he took that ring, he wasn't able to control it because of what the ring would do to him.
Yep.
And it really made me think like, man, there's so much going on in our world and in this realm and all the freedom that God has given us to do things and even the angelic to make choices.
Yeah.
That's gotta be really hard for someone that has all the power and, like, let it all play out. Like, that blows my mind. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Um, yeah, I mean, it's with especially with Gandalf, it's like that it's such fat it was I thought the same thing a little bit, like, okay, because he would have this desire to do good, it'd be like a tyranny, and I think that's kind of like I'm trying to say it's a parallel to like I think Sauron's a better parallel to like maybe
Mhm.
Satan or something. He would through I mean Sauron was making these armies and everything to like destroy he wanted to rule the earth, but his end goal was like, oh, if you rule the earth, you win. Gandalf's end goal was like, oh, if you rule the earth, but for righteousness, you win. And God is all above all that, and he's like,
Yeah.
is like, I'm for righteousness, winning and controlling the earth, but through love, and because God is love, and it's like you can't do that through power. You can't do that through like, and I think that's like a good point to like the ring of power. Like that's why it corrupts it. Like because with this great power, you think that you can control or you think that you can do something with it.
Mm.
And God is kind of like he had told me one time. I had this whole thing with him where he was like talking to me about how kind of power is like fruitless unto itself. I mean, without righteousness, without love, power is useless. Because, like, what are you going to do at some point? Like, imagine we and humans on Earth right now, we're all born with superpowers, or we're like we lived in back in the day with like on the and we had like these crazy like say you were like a like wizard, you could cast fireballs or whatever. Humanity is still corrupt. Like it's still like we're still going to be doing the same thing. Say we could all fly or something, we had wings. I mean, humanity is still corrupt. We're still gonna even though we had maybe more power, like, no matter how much you scale this power, how much you or bring it to, like, a low point, like, I used to ask God, like, "Why don't we have more power? Like, why don't we have, like, superpowers or this or that, like, more spiritual things?" And he's like, "Well, to what end?" Like, and that's the same thing with the One Ring. It's like, to what end is this power gonna actually benefit? Is it without it being used in the right way or through correct like, only God can know, like, how I mean, he's the one who holds all power, and that's how the angels they always look to him, they don't act on their own. They're always listening for his word at all times.
Mm.
They're always listening because they if they act on their own, they're not gonna make the right decision all the time, or they're not gonna know I mean, I'm not sure how all that works technically in heaven, but my point is like unto like the power unto that is like it's fruitless. So only God. That's why I mean he holds all power. But Satan, in his own pride and arrogance, thinks the exact opposite. Like if I had this power, I'd be able to mold it better and control it better than God. And he's
Mhm.
exactly sour. Like I mean, he may be like closer to Sauron in terms of his character, but I mean, at least or is I Sauron?
Saruman is the wizard, and Sauron
Yeah,
is yeah.
Sauron. I mean, he's more closely probably related to Sauron. Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, his underlings Sauron, but like that's what he thinks. Like he wants to control the earth for to unto himself, and he think that's what's going to give him like put him at the top is this power. He's looking at the power and thinking that's what the end all be all is.
Mm.
You know, like that. But the thing about that is like God realizes that his power is not like the end all be all. He is all powerful and he is all righteous and he's all these things. Righteousness is the more where you land on, but like love is at the center. Because like without that, like what's the point of all these powers? I think when we get to heaven, it's gonna be like we might have some superpowers and stuff, but it's just gonna be for fun. You know, it's gonna be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you wanna fly? Oh, we're gonna fly today." God's gonna be like, "Alright, guys, we're all gonna fly today.
Yeah.
We're gonna do that." And you're gonna be like, "Whoa." You know, we're like, "Alright, we're gonna go do this," and it's gonna be cool. But it's gonna be 'cause unto relationship to him. You know,
Mm.
it's gonna be for even loving each other, like, in relationship with each other and things like that. Whereas, again, Satan, he thinks that the power is the end of it. Like, he thinks that the reason why God's God maybe now he knows the truth, but it makes him even hate himself more, but he thought that, like, the power is what made him God, that God made God, what God it makes God who he is, you know what I mean? But it's not, and that's the same thing with Ring of Power. It's like the power is nothing without, like, true and even with Gandalf, though his intentions right, imagine, like, an angel got God's power, there still might be righteous, but they might try to force it upon humanity because
Yeah.
they're like all these humans who they kill each other and they do these things. But like if we just controlled them and we just made it the right and we took away all the bad guys, then it'd be great. But that does take away free will and that takes away like the true essence of what choosing a relationship as a human like that takes the human experience completely out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that was really good, Jake.
Yeah.
No, that got me really thinking a lot, and just thinking back when we were watching this last week here or two of how there's moments that people come across the ring. And so like right now, Faramir is where we're at because we just ended Two Towers and he wanted to take it back to Gondor, and then he understood that it did corrupt his brother. But his brother Boromir, he wanted that power to use against the enemy.
Yeah.
He thought he could control it or because he was strong enough.
Yeah.
And I think what you made a comment I think earlier about pride or like to do things for good, but really at the end of the day when you get that power, you lose the love side. And I think
Mhm.
as where we are as humans, it's if we had like a ring of power like that and you tried to wield it, even if you were a good person, it would be probably it would probably destroy so much.
Yeah.
And to your point where like Sauron or like Lucifer the devil, he's trying to use that and he's using it for all the wrong reasons too because he believes he's just or he has the right way or he can control it because his way is the right way or whatever. And then I'm also thinking of there's so many times, in life when we think we got the right answer or we
Yeah.
think that we know the right move or the right play, and but we can't see the future. And you made this comment about the angels are always listening to the Lord. And how many times do we think we got something because it's like, and I'm laughing internally right now.
Yeah.
A couple times in my life, I'm like, oh, this is great. And
Yeah.
it turned out miserable and terrible.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I didn't go to the Lord to ask him. And then there's a few times I did, and I ignored his advice. Clearly, I knew I'm like, no, I got this. I said, this is so good.
Yeah, we have all done that, yeah.
Yeah. And so you made this comment, like, are we continually listening? Because to a point here is as you grow and as you know, you learn in life and whether you're building a business or you're having a family, there's always leadership aspects that you have to do and you have to make decisions.
Yeah,
You're not
yeah,
like God doesn't just do everything for you. He wants to partner with you. And so with that being said, like you still need to act and you need to be listening because you made that point like those angels and we don't know how it all works exactly, but like yeah, they got to be praying and asking the Lord, like, all right, what do we do? Like,
Yeah.
you're a father and you're the king. And that was so good, man. It just got me really, really thinking. I don't know if you have anything else to add, because I got another segue I want to go into before we finish. But do you have anything else you want to add to that?
I had one thought, and it kind of brought back to, like, when you were talking about how Gandalf was using the hobbits and stuff, and it made me think of the scripture where it's when Jesus is talking, he's like, "The meek shall inherit the earth."
Mm,
And it's like Gandalf is, like, looking at humans in a very Jesus-esque way, or looking at the hobbits, or looking at the people in Middle Earth in a very Jesus-esque way. He's looking at them for their heart and their character, and the hobbits, they're very not all the hobbits, but at least the ones in that we get, they're very, like, they're humble in some sense where they're like, "I'm just a hobbit." Like, I'm not a warrior,
mhm.
especially Bilbo. He's someone like in The Hobbit, the action movie and stuff, in the books, he's like, "I'm not a warrior, I'm not this thing, I'm not even like this great thief. I'm just I'm just Bilbo, I'm just this thing." And he doesn't have this confidence. And I don't think necessarily it's like this lack of confidence, but it's still like this meekness where he's just like, this. And it's like, but Gandalf was looking at it and saw that deep down he had this character where he's going to pull through for his friends and pull through for the people that he loves. And it's like, that's how God looks at us.
Mm.
And so I think that's what a little why, well, like, as humans, eventually the hobbits got corrupted, like, Smeagol and even Frodo
At the
kind of
end, yeah.
at the end. And then at Bilbo, he has that little, like,
You can only you can only hold that ring of power for so long,
yeah,
no matter who you are and affects you. The hobbits just had a more resilient because of that meekness.
yeah.
But eventually it does eat them up.
Yeah. And so I just was thinking about that, like, that's like approaching God, and that meekness is like, if you want to, like, do the things in the spirit and everything, you gotta approach that way. Like, that's why he doesn't, like, just give power to anyone. Like, that's why Moses and everything was the most humble, and that's like he did crazy acts before God. And it's like, but he was also like, oh, like, God, you're, he's like, in David, he's just so humbling themselves before the Lord is, like, so important. I think that's like, I mean, it's not to obtain power, but it's like, if you want to move with God and partner with Him, you can't be thinking you have the right decisions. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, that's good, man. I can't wait to watch the third one. We have one
the
more
third
to
one,
go.
yeah, or
We're
eight, depending on what we said last time. Remember?
8.
Or talking about the
I'm talking
movies?
about the movie,
Oh, I
man.
thought it was a
Yeah.
comment we made in the
Oh,
last
you know, we
podcast where
we
it was like, one
7
of three versus maybe seven.
the 8, yeah.
Oh, but the
No.
movie, yes, yeah, the
And I'm
movie.
excited to see some parallels, and it's so different watching it now, just like what we've been talking about, where I've learned spiritually and just like seeing what that realm is all about. It's so good. So,
Mhm.
last one I got today, and then we'll end session 2 and go into 3 in a different one. But this one's been fun. I didn't think we were actually gonna go down Lord of the Rings. This is great because it's so relevant for us watching it. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in The Hobbit, I would love to hear your thoughts on Smog. So when I watched this, I was like, this is interesting. Smog is a very interesting character to me because
The dragon.
the dragon, yeah, he's
Yeah.
inherently evil. He's not good, but
Mhm.
yet he has a mind of its own. He knows a lot. He's very intelligent.
He's wise,
He's
yeah.
very wise, and he does not seem like a character that would submit to Sauron. Now, he might if he had the ring, because he might side with him. And so I'm watching this, but I'm like, he's got a mind of its own. He's gonna do whatever he wants. He's a dragon. And I was like, that just reminds me of like Leviathan or like a behemoth, like what when the Bible talks
Yeah,
about. And maybe it's not exactly like it, but
or the beast in Revelation.
yeah, but as I was watching this, I'd love to hear your thoughts because I was thinking of like this is like its own creature that is inherently evil. It has a mind of its own. It doesn't want any authority telling it what to do. It doesn't want Sauron telling it what to do.
Yeah,
And it's just gonna do whatever it wants and wreak havoc. And you know what? It's gonna kill orcs. It's gonna kill elves. It's gonna kill you. It's gonna kill on the bad side. You walk in there as an orc, it ain't being like, yo, buddy, you're on my team. No, it's gonna chop its head off.
yeah,
So like bring that back in like your theology or of what
yep.
you've learned of what that is in our terms from that movie.
I think you might have, like, slightly hit it with, like, Leviathan or Behemoth. Like, it's talked about in Job a little bit. I kind of agree. I don't know if he'd, like, submit to sound. I don't know, like, I mean, even the wizards and they were against Sauron, but like they had the free will. They just submit willingly. Men too, but um Smaug, he's interesting because yeah, he is like this such independence, but he is very evil and he's extremely prideful. Like when
Mm,
he's attacking the village, I forgot what he was saying, but he was basically like, "I am death," essentially,
yes. Yep.
and he's like this. He's just so prideful. So he's definitely evil to his core. But, I mean, the Leviathan and Behemoth and Job, and it talks about them, is like God's like, "Who can, fight up against Behemoth? Who can, like, raise him and whatever?" And it's essentially God's getting at this point where he's like, "I'm the only one who can take down, like, Leviathan or Behemoth, like, I created these beings," and it's that they're created beings by God. At least that from what my understanding and kind of like the mythology that is surrounding them in the Bible. Well, I shouldn't say mythology, more like realology.
Realology.
But you know what I mean. So they were created by God because it's like it just showcased God's power to like create something so immeasurably powerful that only God can defeat it. Um, and even though like that he was defeated by
By
a
Bard.
human by
Yeah.
I think it's like it's just essentially like this crazy being that's like just supposed to represent this like this force that is not to be like taken lightly. That maybe you could even say it's like a principality of power because a lot of times I've heard people talking about how you're not supposed to like pray or like reviling principalities is the term that I've heard. Um, we're not really supposed to directly like fight them because there's these powers that you can't like that normal people just can't deal with. Like regular demons, the disembodied souls of the Nephilim, those guys like you can like we have dominion to cast them out. Like Jesus says you can cast out demons. That's just part of being a Christian, especially being filled with the Holy Spirit. It's part of being it. However, principalities and powers and like these fallen ones, they're different. And I think it's like I would even say you could say that maybe Smaug is more like a power or a principality or maybe a dominion. Like he is like this. He's there. When he's there, he's there. And yeah, I think that's kind of like a good parallel to what he might be because he's definitely he's not like a typical like I would say maybe like demons or whatever or like these like the orcs,
Yeah.
but like he's a lot more than that. Um, but he's also like he's not impervious. And I think it's like when if you talk about like in terms of Christianity, like there's people who can fight against principalities, especially when you come together as a group of
Mhm.
Christians, like many, like you can set 10,000 angels to flight, two people in prayer. But at the same time, like if you're like really close walking with God and walking like and having the say like the tools like the black arrow like that he's given to specifically
Mhm.
pierce the armor and stuff, like that's like maybe like David and Goliath, like the tools that God's given you and prepared you for to take out that thing. But not like in principalities, you just don't mess with them normally. Like you just can't be like I'm just like a random guy and I'm just gonna pray against this principality because those are like they have serious like influence in the spiritual world. Like angels, those are the guys that angels are literally fighting with. Like
Yeah, I have an interesting. I'm not going to go into the whole story, but um, I've had some pretty crazy encounters in my life
hmm
with like demons and different things. And then one day I'm in California, and I literally woke up at 3 a.m. and I think I've shared this story with you.
maybe yeah, I think so.
And so I'm not going to get the whole thing, but I remember like, okay, this evil presence just entered this room, and I'm like, ah, crap, I gotta go to battle at 3 a.m. again. I'm like,
Yeah.
dang it. And I'm like, all right, well, let's go. And distinctly remembering this is like a chess match. And
Mm,
I remember I'm like, okay, like it showed its presence. And I woke up and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to fight. And then it did like its move and it showed itself kind of who it was, not fully. Like I'm like, whoa, like this is different.
yeah,
And so I got like really scared. Like
yeah,
I freaked the crap out. And I'm like, all right, Lord, we're not supposed to flee.
yeah.
So I'm like, I said, all right, I said, let's engage basically. And I just remember praying, like, Lord, send some angels. Like, I need
That was your
backup.
first correct thing to do. You're like, back up right now.
I need backup right now. Like, and I remember it was kind of like, okay, let's go. And it's like I moved my pawn out.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I just felt this full presence coming. I've never felt anything like this, man. I'm like,
Mm,
what in the like basically like, what in the hell is this?
Yeah, from
Like pun
literally hell.
intended.
Yeah.
Yeah, like from the pit of hell, like what in the world is going on here? Like this is not a normal demon thing. And I remember
Mhm.
waking up at 3 dealing with this thing and I'm like, I gotta go.
Yeah.
Like I literally felt like this thing's gonna kill me. Like I
Mm.
thought like I'm like, I don't know what it is, but I know that this has dominion and authority in this place that I'm at.
And
And
you're
I
yeah.
literally felt the word run.
Yeah.
Like I was, and I like to fight. I'm a fighter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't like running, man. And I just remember distinctly hearing this run. And I'm like, okay. I grabbed my bag and I went to the airport and I was still scared. And I'm like, I don't know, 20 miles from the Airbnb I was staying at. Dude, and then I just like, I gotta get out of here. I got a
Yeah.
ticket and I went home early. I was like, I had to leave the
Yeah.
state. That's how like this thing didn't want me there at all.
Yeah.
And that, like what you talked about, I was like, I don't know what I ran into, but I was like, this thing is not a normal thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we talked about, like, the first episode a little bit, like, demons are the disembodied spirits, right? They're different. They're, like, lesser. Like, they're not full on, like, these fallen archangel or not archangel, but fallen angel watchers type beings. You know, they're those things, they like the chess matches, and it reminds me of completely not Lord of the Rings, but Narnia, you know, like, when Aslan's talking to the witch, like, "Don't recite the old magic to me, witch, because I was there
Mhm.
when it was written." You know, same thing is, like, they know the word, they know the laws, and they will manipulate it. It reminds me of the same thing when Jesus was being tempted in the garden, you know, like Satan is saying all these things. It's like, oh, well, if you're really the son of man or you're really the Messiah, then why don't you turn that rock into bread? And then Jesus is responding with like, oh, well, man shall not live by flesh and blood alone, but by the word too. So it's like the same thing. It's like we are not Jesus and we are not angels and we don't like we know the law in our capacity, but we are not really always prepared to go up against these things who know the law. Like even referencing Job again, like Satan is like, well, let me take Job out because he has this fear, and therefore it's an open door to allow me to, you know, I'm holding this against him. And Satan is like wanting to like, even with Peter, you know, he's talking about with like the pride that Peter had a little bit before the three rooster crows. It's like Peter, uh, Satan wants to come sift you like wheat. You know, it's like they have these laws and they will try to get any edge that they can,
Mhm.
you know, and you have to really just rely. And I would say when that in your experience, like that was the Holy Spirit being like, yeah, like this is not for you to fight. Like this is just something that is not for you to deal with. It's not your portion right now. It's like you just gotta run because it's he cares more about you than he cares about you defeating that thing. Because he's already did everything at the cross. You know, it's like we like
Yeah.
to think like we're helping God, we're doing things, and that God wants that for us. But at the same time, it's like we can't just in our arrogance think that we're doing something. You know, like he already did all the work for us. And we just have to really rely on him in that regard. So,
That's and that goes back to discernment, right? Like I
hmm
remember like I want to run. I don't want to fight this thing, but I'm like, I don't like running.
yeah,
But I think you're right. There was like, I'm like, I think this thing would have killed me.
hmm
Like and I'm like, I was definitely not prepared at that moment. And maybe like, later in your life, but like I think there's things and this goes, and I think this is where we should kind of wrap it up and then
hmm
go into this in the next one. And I thought this is where we were going to go, but we went into Lord of the Rings, but of like,
yeah,
this thing, I believe, had some dominion and authority in that region,
hmm
and I went into its own region, and I would like to break this down later is, like, if that thing left and came into, like, my house,
mm.
would that have been different? And I think it might have been, but
Well, if you had not run, it might have had then authority to follow you or do something, and I don't know for sure, but I like that's like, you don't know,
yeah.
and, what was I gonna say? I had something another point. Um,
What I was saying
yeah,
is,
sorry.
like, because of the region that it was in, like, it had authority there.
Yeah,
Like, from, like, a geographical location. Like,
dominions.
I think that's part of it, and if that thing encountered me or someone else in a different place, would that have the same bearing and the same authority to do different things? So, say somebody just prayed over their house, they, walls, oiled it, they did, like, for years. This
Mhm,
is sacred ground that has been given to God, generations,
mhm.
and that thing tries to enter, I think it would be different. I don't
Oh,
think it
yeah.
I think location and how people do things. And this is why I don't want to go too far into this because this is going to go another hour, but like
Yep.
burial grounds, things that are sacrificed on, you
Yeah.
just keep naming it.
I mean, even, like, people like cities that engage with certain types of culture. Like that
Yeah.
that is like, you got like cities who have just like, I mean, we went to Las Vegas recently. I mean, like think about like some of the not good stuff that might go on there. It's like there's probably, some principalities, demons that have some influence when you go there. And of course we were, protected because we prayed a lot, but it's like I agree. When you go into the region, especially when you have a stronger presence in the Lord, like you do have power and you do have dominion, and they attack you. They don't care about the people who are not paying attention. They care about the people who are paying attention.
Mhm.
And so it's like it's important to always be vigilant and discerning, like you said. Like you have to know what God tells you, do it. You do it. And I do agree. Like we could probably go to this next episode, but like the people who have like they're putting the anointing oil and everything in sacred sites and like I mean, it's a good thing. It's a prophetic act. You're dedicating those things, and that probably does things in the spirit where they like that's like in the law. Like, no, the demon can't go here now because this thing has been prayed over. It's like you can't do this. Like it's like the law can't be broken in that area. So there's something to be said there. So
Yeah, I think there's a big thing there. Like, I
hmm
think we forget how much authority that we have through Christ with our words
oh
and
yeah,
actually doing things.
yeah. I
Like
mean,
it's
the world was created with the word.
say that again?
The entire creation was created with the word of God, and if Jesus is the word, it's like how much do our words matter? If we're made in the image of God,
Boom.
boom.
You heard it here from Jake Hatch. That's good, man. Let's end there and then let's go into the next segment on the realms and territories and battles. And I got some pretty fun stories I might break out that I have not really shared with a lot of people.
Mm.
You know some of them that we can go
Oh yeah.
into, and I think it's a good segue actually. Um, I got one I haven't told you yet that happened not too long ago.
Oh yeah.
It's an intense one, and just kind of break all those things down from a region standpoint. But I love the Lord of the Rings
That was a great
conversation.
segue.
Yeah, dude. There's one more thing I'm gonna add to
Mm.
this, and then let's. I know I keep saying this, but it's really interesting because C.S. Lewis does this in the Chronicles of Narnia. But it's really interesting that the Hobbit dragons are real. The orcs. There's all these, dwarves, elves. There's not really anything fairy tale-ish. Everything, and I say this because in C.S. Lewis, all the Narnians, all this, but like in Prince Caspian in the second one, the humans, the Termarillions, I think they call them, they're the humans. They don't believe in the Narnians,
Yeah,
and
because they came from Earth.
yeah, and so in Lord of the Rings, when you get to the Lord of the Rings after the Hobbit, there's a lot of things where like, oh, I don't know if these things are real or that's just a story, that's just a myth, and I'm like, I feel like the first setup was kind of like the Old Testament and like the
Yeah,
early Earth, and now we're getting into.
the Deception era.
And it's what's interesting is because the end of Lord of the Rings and the end of Chronicles of Narnia, it all comes out and it's like crazy. Like
Yeah,
it's just crazy. And so I feel like that's kind of where we're at right now.
I agree. Yeah, it's definitely it's Old Testament is that's like they just knew they just knew it existed. It didn't like wasn't like, oh, does this exist or not? Like they just knew, and then now it's kind of like there's so much deception, but it's like people are like, I don't know, like is the spiritual thing still a thing? Like, I don't know, that ended with the Acts church. Like they don't those miracles don't really happen the same way, or things like that, even in the Christian church. But I think that's it's gonna come out. Everything is it's getting everything you can feel it nowadays. Everything's ramping up.
Dude, you can still feel it. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, on that note, next one.